Well, I would like to try and answer the question about what is the difference between Copenhagen and Kyoto, and what are we to expect in terms of bringing developing countries on board. I think the very short answer to that would be that the difference between Copenhagen and Kyoto is the Bali Action Plan. I think that we have something very important and unique in the Bali Action Plan, which we have not had before. And that is the provision that developing countries for the first time may be willing to join the global mitigation action on the understanding that they would implement domestically, nationally appropriate mitigation actions. So for those of you who follow the discussion, you know that there is quite a lot of discussion is now centered on NAMAs. So if NAMAs take off, that would be one additional mechanism there, in addition to CDM, that would allow developing countries to get credit for domestic action. And that would be not only project-based, but probably policy-based. But in order for that to happen, there is quite a lot of work remains to be done, including on monitoring and verification system. But I think what is important is the formula is there on the table. And then the details would be supplied later. But the NAMA formula, I think this is what would make the difference. And on CDM, you know that CDM has been quite a success in many ways, and we now have, close to 5,000. Whoever checked last time, I don't know, but the portfolio is growing very rapidly. We have a vast number of projects in the international pipeline, but at the same time, there are imbalances. There are sectoral and geographical imbalances, and certain project categories are not very well addressed, particularly energy efficiency that all of us have been emphasizing here. So clearly, in Copenhagen and in the work that would follow Copenhagen, greater effort needs to be spent to find a way to refine, to calibrate the CDM further so that we could make carbon finance available for particular type of projects. I don't know if that satisfies your question. Thank you.
Thank you. And we could have some more clarity both on the Galapagos choice of wind power and I think a couple other, the E8 initiative.
Thank you. I'll take 3 out of the 4 because I got them. All righty. On Galapagos, the question about the birds. You know, the Charles Darwin Foundation was circulating a petition against the project before we got there. And it was because they were very, very concerned about the birds. And when Dick and Andy said, go down there, but it's going to be tough as nails, they weren't kidding. But to your point about community collaboration, we worked hand in hand with the Darwin people, set up a bird expert committee with Darwin at the table, professors that knew about wind-bird interactions, and we developed a plan, not surprisingly, to address the issue, because no one knew precisely what the behavior was of the endangered petrel, the bird of concern, and wind turbines. There was absolutely zero prior experience with this. And this goes to lag time. We spent over 2 years, about every night, tracking the flight patterns of the endangered petrel to know exactly where these birds were going. And we looked on 3 hilltops, all better than the one that we chose for wind, but all had too many birds. And they were going in too many different directions. But we found a hill where about 99% of the time, the birds would always fly to the right to go to the ocean to get fish for their young. And they always flew 4 meters, no higher. Verified by the bird experts as very accurate scientific data. We knew that our blades were going to be higher than their maximum altitude. And we knew if we put the turbines to the left instead of to the right on that hilltop, that the birds would be at very low risk. And we also knew that by now putting up not just 3 wind turbines that were 50 meters tall, but transmission lines from those wind turbines down to the road, that we might introduce a new hazard for these animals. And you might remember that on the Galapagos, on our hilltop, the sun never shines, except when you need a picture. About 99% of the time, the cloud cover stays low. So we figured that the birds probably couldn't see very well if they got off track. And so we buried the transmission line, a recommendation of the 3 bird experts that sat with us to locate, design, operate, and maintain the units. And they're very happy today. They also said that there was another reason why these birds were endangered. And it was because of the rats that were left years and years and years ago. And they said, is there anything you all can do about these rats? We said, okay, give us some ideas. He said, we're using this rat poison that's just specific to rats for the tortoises, because they like tortoise eggs. And we think that if you have the money in your budget to pay the National Park Service employees to go poison these rats, that we'll get more baby birds. Now, the jury's still out because we've only been doing this 2 years, but the preliminary indications are that the populations there are increasing, and this is excellent news. So by the community interaction, and by the way, this was the very first project to go through a brand new regulation in Ecuador called public involvement. We did many, many stakeholder meetings on the island, including the very first one when I got down there and people said, so what is a wind turbine? Where do you want to put it? How tall is it? And then we just kept right after it. And at the end of the day, the EIS, the EIA, all of those documents showed that the record was very clear that we had addressed everybody's issues satisfactorily. So public involvement from the very start. And that's exactly how we would approach this global electrification plan as well. And, you know, frankly, all of the planning process. But aside from the cost effectiveness, there's a very important other reason. And that is that there's a learning experience that can go on here. Individual countries can talk about what they need to do, but they can talk among themselves and learn from each other. So when you regionalize this, the learning extends, and the ability to work together in partnerships is much greater. So I think did I do it?
I believe you did.
Is that okay?
Is everyone?
No?
No?
Just wanted to ask, to remind the issue is, who's going to be at the table? Is it only going to be government officials on the delegation? What's the size of the delegation? And who determines who will be part of the delegation?